Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. It really pleasures me a lot that in the last couple of weeks I was able to deliver some really great news coming from Ukrainian front lines, and today is no exception. We just had a frontline update recently, but already since then we got even more information and it's more great news. Firstly, a little bit about calculations. We talked about that over the last week for Russia, the advances that they were achieving were quite pitiful. They were able to capture only 12 square kilometers per week, which equal to about 2 square kilometers per day, and which was the lowest tempo of advances since 2024. It is over 2-year lowest. But now we're having a completely different perspective altogether. The freshest data last week is stating that Ukraine was able to regain a net 16 square kilometers of territory. This is obviously a fantastic turnaround where Ukraine suddenly is regaining more ground than it's losing. And there is an important caveat that we do need to put here, that current operations, a lot of this is being hidden, so actually we don't report everything that is happening on the front line and how much Ukraine is advancing, and only when we get new influx of information like this video over here, that's when we can report it. That is one thing. And second thing, that right now it is a bit of a lull and Russians are trying to recoup their forces. They're trying to regroup. That is well known. So Ukrainians overall are gaining ground. They are pushing Russians back, but there are things that potentially can still move it into the Russian way. So don't get too hung up on these numbers just yet. Just celebrate them for what it is right now. Russia getting their ass handed to them. And I think the best one who describes it right now is Sergei Flash, because he understands this very well. And he says that right now there's a lot of things that are happening on the front lines that is going really well for Ukrainian armed forces. There are things that he just cannot talk about because Russia is waging propaganda war. Russia wants to have this perspective in the media and in everyone's understanding that they are one-sidedly advancing and Ukraine is just collapsing non-stop. Yet whenever it's being reported by the Ukrainian officials, the Russians are instantly reacting. They don't react that much if it's like, some OSINT analysts or that are describing it. It's more about whether it makes the news and media and makes it on the Putin's desks or not. And that's when the response is happening. Because so far, the response has not been really happening. I gotta say, I thought Russians were a little bit smarter. I take it back. I really gave them the benefit of the doubt. Because in my last video, I talked about the fact that, Russians have been counterattacking, that Russians have been actually going against the Ukrainian offensive. So I thought, well, that was expected. Ukrainians have regrouped, and then Russians apparently is now finally attacking on the main axis of attacks of Ukrainian armed forces, which is going from north to south. That was all wrong. That there are some fighting back from Russians, of course, but the main attacks that Russia is conducting is still towards the east. It's just because Ukraine is attacking from a lot of different directions. The counterattacks that were mentioned were actually the ones on the east. So to get you straight, what is happening right now is Ukrainians are continuing advancing from north to south, and Russians are attacking eastwards. So they are not really preventing Russians essentially still completely cutting out and just removing this offensive potentially altogether, which is great news for us. We all know that we are very lucky that Russians are so fucking stupid. It's just incredible to see that it's still the case. But the biggest Ukrainian advances are right now in that pocket that I outlined already many times. The goal of Ukrainians is this square right over here. Again, we're getting delayed information, so I'm not saying that Ukrainians are already next to it, but let's just say that it's quite possible. Ukrainians were able to essentially retake this big pocket. There is also reports that Ukrainians were able to advance right over here, and there is an additional push going here. Ukrainians are literally next door to their major objectives. The reports are, if you look why this is important, I already mentioned that there is this road that is going through this settlement that I outlined, and Ukrainians right now are already 2 kilometers away from this road. This road, when cut, is going to be big problems for Russia, and when Ukrainians hopefully take over this square right over here that they're right next to already, then we're going to see a really big success for Ukrainian armed forces in this specific area of operations. And again, nothing is stopping Ukrainians just advancing, and it's only from time to time we're getting drops from some older videos reporting that Ukrainians have been seen in some of the forward positions, or Ukrainian soldiers winking and nudging to us, stating is like, Russians are not liking what is happening right now a lot. And things are going pretty bad. Russians, they talk in their propaganda terms. They always talk about how much they're destroying the Ukrainian armed forces until you kind of start dissecting the patterns of what Russians are saying. And then you catch some of them from time to time actually throwing out pieces of data that shows how bad things actually are. I mean, we all know that things actually are bad for Russia because of their tempo of advances and because the 3-day special military operation has been now ongoing for over 4 years. There is this guy, Sergei Konko. He's basically nobody, like one of the guys that is working with one of the battalions of Russians that are fighting against Ukrainians. That's not the point. The point, he was going to do a speech in a local regional parliament in Russia. And he's talked about a couple of things. He noted that there is now a big increase in Ukrainian unmanned system forces and how intense it is, and that the kill zone has been increasing steadily from being around 3.5 kilometers in 2023 and now being about 30 kilometers wide in 2026. And the main part of his speech actually was right over here, where he actually kind of let the cat out of the bag. And he stated, in regards and with the great intensity of the fighting in the direction of our brigade, the number of losses increased significantly. Over the past 2 months, our detachment has lost more than in the previous 2 years. What can I say? I think this speaks for itself, because there's a lot of excuses that can be made, like that this was not fighting on the front line, that now there's like some other things, different war, yada, yada, yada. There's a lot of excuses that couldn't be made. But the fact of the matter is that this war is extremely lethal for Russians, and the new directives, and Russians are acknowledging them themselves, that the directives by the new Minister of Defense of Ukraine are being taken into account, and they're being performed in reality. So goal to destroy 50,000 Russians per month, and goal to go against the Russian drone operators have been the absolute cry topic of Russian Z propagandists non-stop for the last whole week. So the problem for Russians is that the current, as I said, front line is very lethal. And they have been reliant on a lot of good communications, specifically from Starlink. And we already discussed many times that why it is really bad for Russia to lose Starlink, that they don't really have any analogous information. But the main point why Russians are now having losses is because the lack of training. Russia tried to just use this mass of soldiers that they have to gain the advantage and move along the front line and gain these kilometers to show for the propaganda. The problem with that is that for Russia, this meant one thing and one thing only, that you have very poorly trained soldiers that don't really know what to do or how to do it. And very often times it was like this, that there was someone with the knowledge that was guiding Russians with their drones. So there would be like a piece of land that Russians would need to cross to get to some kind of a target or a position, and they would try to get there by sending these soldiers that have absolutely no training or zero clue whatsoever. And then there would be another, like an operator with a drone with an attached either Starlink unit or some other ability to communicate with the local positions. And then this drone operator would guide and help this soldier navigate this terrain to get to the position specified. With the Starlink gun, we have increased amount of reports that Russians are getting just lost. Russians don't have this guidance from drones because either the Starlink system is unreliable, or the drone systems are just getting jammed, or drone teams are now being hunted if it's some kind of a optical wire guided drones. And this is what Russians are crying about. And a lot of these soldiers that are there on the ground that just have no training, no understanding how to fight this war, and beforehand they were able to perform tasks because they were hand guided to do these tasks. Now they just get out, they get lost, they either sometimes start engaging each other and fighting each other, or sometimes they get injured and they cannot even call for evacuation because beforehand, again, Starlink was the one that provided them with some internet access, and they can say that we are now injured, we are outside of positions, we've been struck. And they get struck and they cannot report it, and then they send more soldiers there. It is absolute chaos for Russia right now at the front line. Now, there are Russian units, they're fewer and far between, but there are units that are more competent and they're trying to adapt to the changed situation. Here, for example, you can see Russian masking of drone antennas that are putting outside to help guide the drones. Here you can see them being built up. This is how they would look right outside in the snow. And this is, for example, just outside laying this whole antenna setup. As you can see, it's pretty thoroughly masked. Like if you would be flying like a drone with pretty bad camera, or having a good camera, but flying on the 5 kilometer distance away from the ground, it would be kind of hard to tell whether these are real or not. So Russians are trying their approach, but they're doing their best, but they're also very much crying about Ukrainian drone operators, and that directives from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense have been really going well. And this is all happening thanks to you, because you are supporting Ukrainian, so you're supporting Ukrainian drone operations. Participate in our fundraiser for the FPVs, for the Black Raven. Right now, this is the best way that we can support Ukraine. And with all of that said, the hottest topic of discussion that has been there in the Russian space is whether or not Russia will do mobilization in April, because Russia is now blocking Telegram. Russia is preparing all of these activities to not allow Russians to essentially communicate and get out of their service. We know that Russia is an unsustainable model for the army that is driven by money, and Russia is running out of money. So there is a good chance that potentially in April, Russia will declare mobilization efforts. Right now, Ukraine is improving about the same number of Russians as Russia is currently recruiting, though Russia has been struggling recruiting more people in the recent months. However, if Ukraine gets this ratio up and gets to 50,000 Russians removed per month, then suddenly Russian military will start dwindling. And with all of the problems that we just outlined, that will mean one thing and one thing only, that the ratio of Ukraine returning ground to Ukraine is going to be bigger and bigger and bigger, and at some point Russian army will just, well, lose. And this is unacceptable. So that's why they are now considering whether or not they can really get more forced mobilization into the Russian military. Now, this is an interesting discussion. It's a topic whether Russia can or cannot. I don't expect anything from the Russians, so my default expectation is that even if there is mobilization, then Russians themselves will pose nothing, and it's going to be just Russians sent on the front line. The problem for Russians is that even if there's going to be more Russians, the fact that they don't have the training capacity, the fact that don't have the proper tactics, the fact that we still see Russia using the stupidest possible things and not training their troops is not going to bring that much benefits for the Russia. It might allow it to continue this war, where they will gain some more ground, but it's not going to change the whole perspective of a front line, even if they get mobilized. So that's why, while there are discussions on the mobilization and how bad it could be for Ukraine if Russia suddenly gets new influx, I think the modern war is not that much favoring anymore a country with major manpower advantage, at least at the current moment. And Ukraine has the quality, and Ukraine is trying to reform their army, and they're doing a pretty good job. So trust in Ukraine, support Ukrainian armed forces. I love you. Slava Ukraini, and I'll see you next time. And here is a special message from one of our friends.
Friends, hello! The 93rd Mech Brigade's Drone Systems Battalion extends heartfelt thanks to the charity fund Dziga's Paw and Ukraine Matters for their support, thanks to which the sky becomes more orderly and on the ground fewer false illusions remain about the great army. Your help isn't just boxes of equipment, it's additional kilometers of stable video communication, more reliable power, and dozens of occupiers and destroyed enemy vehicles added to the General Staff's report. Your donations are a compelling argument against the excessive optimism of those who got lost on their way to Kyiv in 3 days. Thank you. We are grateful for your support, helping us to confidently keep the skies under control. With the help of your donations, we are creating the reality that the occupiers truly do not like. Glory to Ukraine! Glory to the heroes!